Yesterday, we did hear from the Nigeria Labour Congress, the Trade Union Congress, as well as the organized private sector, having called off the strike that had lasted for 2 days. And there has been a lot of conversations as to, the economic implications of the strike so far. And if, that strike again resumes after 5 days, because the strike has been called off for just 5 days. And if this is a temporal solution or a temporal effect that we are seeing, what then will be the economic implications of that moving forward? And we did, put out a social media poll yesterday to ask Nigerians how that strike action had affected their businesses or affected them generally economically. And we did get quite a number of responses. This is the question that we did ask Nigerians to share their thought and what has been the economic impact of the suspended NLC TUC strike on your well-being, your family, your business, and otherwise. And we did get quite a number of responses on social media. Let's take a look at some of these responses that we did get back from social media users here in Nigeria. Aliyu Shehu Yaro here is saying it was a necessary sacrifice, and in honesty, everything remains the same. He's saying that the strike or the industrial action was a necessary sacrifice. However, everything else remained the same. Let's move away from this comment now to other comments that we have received. Abdul here saying that it doesn't add any value, yet because the federal government has been making a lot of promises for long. The negative impact is this, is increasing the rate of hardship on the poor masses. Again, he's saying that the masses are the ones struggling with the harsh, economic realities that Nigeria as a country is facing. But moving away from that now, Zainab Abubakar is saying so far a significant amount has been saved in fuel costs, not to mention the energy conserved from naps, as well as the reduction in exhaustion and stress. In essence, the strike was like a free holiday. Zainab is saying that she did enjoy, the strike, having to take time off work and rest. But let's move away now from Zainab's comment. Abdul Razak here is saying that the extreme hardship and suffering hindered the impact of the strike, and people went about their normal businesses as if nothing was happening, but the government felt it harder. Another comment right there. But moving away from Abdul Razak's comment, let's take a look at other comments that we have we indeed received on social media. Let's move away from Abdul Razak's comments here. Adekunle Curtis is saying no impact. He's saying there was no impact of the strike whatsoever. But let's move away from Adekunle's comment now to other comments that we have received so far. I believe those are all the comments that we will be highlighting this morning. But now we will be talking about the economic implications of the strike action that Nigeria as a country witnessed recently. So much conversations, has happened so far regarding the proposed minimum wage by the NLC, the proposed increase in minimum wage by the federal government, and the debates between, dousing inflation and increasing minimum wage. But generally, we will be discussing, whether or not the federal government can indeed afford the proposed minimum wage. I am now joined by my guest, who is a financial expert, Kalu Aja. Thank you very much for joining us on Business Daily.
Hi, great to be here. Thank you.
Thank you again. Let's just start off with you just giving us an appraisal on what has happened so far. How has Nigeria, being impacted economically by the strike action that we witnessed? We saw that impact on the equities market, the banking sector, the financial sector as a whole. But let's hear from you now. How has the impact been as drastic as it may seem, especially from numbers that we have seen being released, from the equities market? As I say, numbers never really lie. But has the economy really been affected as the numbers are saying?
Yeah, well, it was a total shutdown. And, the economy runs on commerce, interactions between buyer and seller. And when you have a strike, that doesn't happen. So the markets were down, the airports were down, the ports were down, even power supply was down. All that would have a feedback effect on the economy. Companies didn't produce stuff, and someone didn't get paid work. So the GDP, the earnings, all that is going to be affected when we start to see the numbers into the future. Well, we're going to count these days as lost. Those are days lost from the economy. That should have been 30 days. Now it's going to be 29 or 28. So it adds up into a negative for the economy that's already battling with high inflation of food, high cost of doing business. So this is going to be a major factor, especially if by next week we start the strike again. So the uncertainty, the markets don't like uncertainty. So when there's uncertainty, the investors stay out of the market. That's why I see the market sort of goes south. People want to just wait and see what will happen. If the wages are increased, it has an effect. People want to see all that before they take action at the end of their investment.
Yeah, well said there. That is my guest, Kalu Aja. But let's go on a short break. My guest is still on standby. The conversation continues right after the break. Do stay. And you're still watching Business Daily, coming to you live on Trust TV. And just before the break, we started a conversation on the economic implications of the just concluded strike. But then again, the question on the minds of most Nigerians is, can the federal government really afford, the proposed minimum wage by the labor unions here in Nigeria? But I do have my guest with me. He is Kalu Aja. We already did start a conversation before the break. Thank you again, Kalu, for joining us on Business Daily.
Thank you. Still here.
Okay, I would like for you to answer this question. You did write an opinion piece recently that delved into whether or not the federal government can, afford the proposed minimum wage. But let us hear from you. After the findings that you have conducted, what will be the answer to that question?
Well, if you just look at Naira and Kobo alone, it's difficult for the government to bring out about 4-point-something trillion for the new minimum wage. As if we go by the 400,000 or so that NLC is asking for. Wages alone are about 44% of the entire federal government's expenditure, just wages, salaries alone, right? We're not talking about capital expenditures or debt repayment, just salaries, 44% already. So anything you add on that is going to take you above 60, 80%. So just by the Naira and the Kobo, the government can't afford it. I've heard people say, scrap the disc allowance, capital allowance. No, it's just too much, really. At 400,000, even at 100,000, it's going to sap a lot of the revenues generated by the government because really oil output is low as of today. Customs duties and FIRS are really where we get the bulk of our revenues from. I'm not sure if we're going to take all that just to pay salaries. We still have a huge debt that we service. So that's the simple answer right now. Yeah.
You did make a very valid or a very interesting point in that article where you talked about the economic impact and inflation control, where you said that, fighting inflation to single digits could reduce labor unions' demand. What specific measures at this point do you think the federal government could implement towards tackling inflation? So far, we have seen, quite a number of measures, especially from the monetary side of government, but they don't seem to have yielded the expected result. So what other measures are you proposing at this point?
Yes. So inflation in Nigeria is really about food prices. Food prices have gone up, and food is 51% of what we call the consumer price index. So how we measure inflation is to measure the consumer price index. So we're measuring 51% of that basket in food. So food goes up, inflation goes up. Why is food expensive in Nigeria? Because the food growing areas are under stress, either stress from insecurity or low yields. So the way to tackle this is to say maybe a 3-part plan. Immediately, you want to say you don't like to import food into the country. Short term, maybe 0 to 3 months, food imports can come into the country to reduce the default in demand, in supply, I mean. Then you can then start to invest in the rural areas to say you want to grow food output, fertilizers, roads, that sort of thing. But immediately you've got to really tackle the insecurity that is causing the food output to fall in the food growing areas in Nigeria. But ultimately, it's a food issue. Inflation in Nigeria is a food issue. If you can bring down the cost of food, either through reducing the taxes, the VAT that we pay at the port, or even asking the Nigerian customs to use even 100 Naira to $1 as the exchange rate for food and food-related products, tractors, fertilizers, all that kind of stuff, then you can start to bring down the price of inflation to single digit. Then the demand by labor can then reduce a bit because they're asking for 400, because that's the living wage when you compare it to at a dollar or to the rise of inflation is about 40%. So we're going to tackle inflation, and that would reduce the wage demands by the NLC.
I would like for us to touch on, revenue generation in Nigeria. And considering the current economic, situation, do you believe there are alternative ways that Nigeria can, raise more revenue without raising taxes at this point, which of course, would further burden the Nigerian economy, burden the private sector especially. Are there alternative ways that Nigeria can, generate revenue at this point beyond increasing taxes?
Yeah, well, first of all, every government raises revenues from taxes, really all governments. The problem with Nigeria is that we have very, very low tax to GDP because of just the way our efficiencies are set up. The way we collect taxes is very inefficient. We don't know who is who. We don't have unique identifiers. Lots of Nigerians are not banked. So that's the first point of the question. We've got to increase taxes. If you take away taxes, you've got to come back to cutting costs. Your Rassanian report. If you cut costs, you sort of allow the revenues that you collect to go further. So that's one way of doing it. Another way is to say want to do asset sales or privatization. There are lots of dead assets in Nigeria that if the private sector takes over, the private sector can take a much better job in creating wealth for the country, which then can be taxed. NNPC is a big liability at the moment. If you privatize NNPC and you then tax it as a corporation, set out of the government, you make more money than supporting them with these cash calls and all that kind of stuff. Nigerian natural gas, we own about 49%. You could think about selling 10% to get the bulk cash in now and invest in infrastructure while you use your own budget to then fund wage increases. So there are other ways, asset sales, privatizations, of course, these are going to be what we want to look at. But taxes is the real deal. You've got to increase the amount to collect by taxes, not by increasing the rate, but by broadening the base of those that pay taxes. So you can actually reduce the tax rate, but broaden the base, and you can raise much more revenues.
You just touched on the Oroshaye report, and that obviously points towards the direction of the government reducing its spending. But is that really realistic or feasible at a time such as now?
Politically, it's a hot potato, because what it means is you're going to have to let folks go. You have to rationalize ministries, departments, agencies. You might have some job losses, but long term, it favors the country. I don't know if the president today has got the political capital to push through a wide restructuring of the Nigerian civil service. I'm not sure he has. If he can, it helps him in the long term. Maybe he does it in his second term, but right now, I don't know if with the current status of labor, he can push through any major, should we say, restructuring of the Nigerian civil service. But that's the best thing to do. Take the civil service, reconcile them, reduce the duplicities and the costs, so you can have a much more productive service that costs less and does more. Yeah.
You have, re-emphasized the need for fiscal discipline, cutting costs here and there. But I will like for you to be more specific. What specific areas are you, looking towards that should be targeted for costs and the potential impact that these cuts may have on the public service in general?
Yeah, look at the budget. Look at any Nigerian budget. You see things like service-wide votes. You see things like we're buying cars, we're buying buses, we're buying Toyotas, we're paying for trainings abroad, honorariums. You see lots of line items. You can just go one by one. Websites, furniture. They just keep repeating. Newspapers. If you go line by line and you're serious about cutting costs, you can save a lot of money. Specifically, look at the procurement process in Nigeria. So lots of money is wasted on procurement. Why not just simply say, we want to buy buses? If you can give us a cheaper way to buy goods for the federal government, we will give you 10% of whatever savings. Have a portal and do open bidding, so you can reduce the cost of what the federal government is buying. They're buying the same things I buy, but they buy twice the cost that I pay. So if you look at the procurement process, look at even how they spend money on the normal cost of doing business. Gas, when they buy fuels for their vehicles, they spend a lot on that. Just making sure that you are watching the Naira and the Kobo, making sure everything is off cash and into using cards and electronic means, you save a lot of money. I just read the report to you that want to start biometrics on the cash for quote-unquote poor people. That means we didn't do it in the past. Those are billions that have been wasted on paying poor people without biometrics. So it's not how to change what we're doing, but essentially to bring in accountability into what we're doing, so that every Naira can be tracked, and that way you reduce the fraud and the waste, and then you can go further than what we're doing right now.
Well said there. But I'd like for us to touch on, balancing wage hikes and economic stability. The NLC and the federal government indeed, had an agreement at the end of their meeting yesterday, having an amount of 60,000 naira as the new minimum wage, which the NLC don't seem to be, be 100% okay with. But I will like for you to, speak regarding that. With the proposed minimum wage now of 60,000 naira, what do you see? Well, what do you expect to be the main challenges in, balancing the need for wage hikes and maintaining economic stability on the other hand?
Yeah. So look, let's be very, very honest, right? Productivity in Nigeria is very, very low. So if you pay minimum wage of 60, is 60 plus, and I haven't seen 100,000. If you pay, say, 60 plus to a Nigerian worker, you have increased money supply into the economy, but you haven't increased production. So you're going to have lots of people with 100,000 naira in their paychecks when they get paid, but nothing to buy. So costs are going to go up because now they have cash, but there's no cheap rice, there's no cheap food to buy. So there's lots of cash chasing too few goods, they're going to have inflation, right? It's not going to be stimulative if you simply give people cash without allowing the economy to produce goods that are cheap enough for them to buy. And it's just civil service workers. Not everybody works for the government. You have private sector workers. What that means, they're going to pay maybe the menial workers, their pay is going to go up. But the non-private sector guys, how do they get the funds to then pay their wages? So when you increase minimum wage anywhere in the world, even in the US, you remove certain people from being employed because not everybody can pay that minimum wage. Nigeria's case is very peculiar because we have, like I said, a very unproductive economy. There is no power supply that you can rely on. The infrastructure, the roads, the rails are very, very weak. So you're going to have a lot of cash potentially put into the system without the productivity to soak it out of the system. So the wages are not the problem. The problem that the naira has fallen because we have a very, very unproductive economy. And then to fix that fall in naira, we're trying to pay ourselves more naira. The naira is not the problem. The economy itself is not working. If you fix the economy, there'll be no need for more naira because 10 naira will take you more. So now we're trying to pay 1,000 naira for what used to cost 10 naira. That's really not the solution. We've got to fix the economy, make it productive, and then the cost will fall as a consequence of that productivity.
And if that does happen, what will be the social implications of that? Now, I'm talking about too much money in circulation, increased inflationary pressures. We will like to hear from you now what the social implications of that would be.
No, right now, we're seeing it right now, inflation, where there's food inflation of 40% right now. So your Bulgari is how much, 80, 60,000? There's food inflation because there's no supply of food. And that's where you're going to see it exacerbated. There'll be lots of cash, but nothing to buy. Because we're printing naira, but we can't print dollars. And we import the bulk of our inputs to do production in Nigeria. So you're going to have millions of naira, but no dollars to then import those inputs that you then process locally to have finished goods for folks to buy. So wage is part of a strategy. We've got to fix the economy. If you simply pay people more, then you're going to lead to inflation. And I agree with the NLC. There has to be a wage increase. You can't pay people 30,000 naira a month. But the issue is not the wages. The issue is that the economy that the workers are working under in Nigeria is not productive. You simply cannot pay someone simply because there's inflation. You've got to fix the problem. It's like, I give you an analogy. If the road is bad, you can buy an SUV to go over the bad road. But how many SUVs can you buy? So it's cheaper to fix the road than use a bus and go over the fixed road. What NLC is asking for today is to give everybody an SUV to go over the bad road. But to fix the problem, fix the bad road, then the buses can go through, the cost fall for everyone. You have to think of it that way. They need a salary increase, I get it. But the government can't argue not to pay them because the government has been wasteful with their revenues. That's why the government really can't argue. But if you pay a large amount of money without increasing productivity, you're going to lead to inflation down the line, which is going to be worse. Yeah.
you have re-emphasized the need towards fixing, the root problem first before, we start to fix other issues. But I will want for you to suggest, maybe 2 or 3 low-hanging fruit solutions that Nigeria desperately needs at this point.
Yeah, number one, inflation. You could fix inflation by fixing food. That's agriculture. The largest contributor for our economies is agriculture. Right now, we're having nearly a negative growth in agriculture. It's about 0.77 when compared to last year. So if you simply invest in agriculture and get agricultural output back up, you increase your GDP, you increase employment at the rural areas. So what to do is a rural transformation using agriculture as a stimulant in the rural area. That's a very, very low-hanging fruit we can go after. There's also land reform. We have lots of land where we have dead capital, so there's no CFO because someone has to sign. If you reform land reform, you instantly create equity for lots of folks that have land. You can then have wealth by going to the bank to use that equity as your capital to then borrow to do agriculture as well. Then, of course, the big one, infrastructure. Even if Nigerians can get 10 hours of guaranteed power, that's enough for them to plan and SMEs can start. We have to have guarantee, not just the power, but cheap power. We have oil, we have gas. So if you fight inflation using agriculture, if you do land reform and you do power, you are well on your way. The Nigerians are naturally entrepreneurial. They can take care of the rest by themselves. Just get out of the way. Fix what you as a government can fix. The Nigerian entrepreneurs will take care of the rest. Yeah.
Let us speak to the role of the private sector in all of this. What contribution can the private sector, bring up at this point towards alleviating the current economic downturns that Nigeria is facing?
Yeah, they're going to bring capital. They're going to bring know-how. So the private sector basically creates jobs. The government can create a job. It can redistribute income to create a job, but only the private sector can create a job. They can take capital, employ somebody, that person is employed. But the private sector today can't really function because interest rates are high, infrastructure, power, roads are down, and there's even lack of general insecurity. There's an oil firm, large.
We seem to have lost a guest there. We have been speaking with Kalu Aja, who is a financial expert. And the question that he has, tried to answer on the program today is, can the federal government really afford the proposed minimum wage? Well, in summary, the answer, according to our guest, is no, considering the current, economic and inflationary pressures that Nigeria is facing. Thank you very much, Kalu Aja, for all the insights that you have given to us on the program today. But join the conversation on social media and let us hear from you. What are your thoughts on the proposed minimum wage by the NLC, the agreement that they did have with the federal government yesterday, and the call-off of the temporary call-off of the strike action by the NLC? And this is where we draw the curtains in today's edition of the program. My name is Chiamaka Enendu. Thank you for watching, and bye for now.